right, we are back once again, and our guest, special guest, Dustin Gawrylow, Managing Director of the North Dakota Watchdog Network. Back, we had a great discussion on this special assessment task force and handling things differently. I find it very interesting. I'm sure many of our viewers do. Next up, you have, I would say, a somewhat passionate attitude about a constitutional measure that would make it more difficult to change our Constitution that I believe is in the signature gathering phase.
Yes, there's a group led by the North Dakota Chamber that is collecting signatures currently to place a measure on the ballot that would do two things. It would increase the threshold required for changing the North Dakota Constitution from simple majority to 60%, and then implement what is called a single subject rule on future constitutional measures. And that would apply to both citizen measures and measures that start in the legislature, which is an interesting concept. It would also require 60% in the chamber, I believe, to put it on the ballot. And basically, there's this notion that initiated measures and constitutional measures are too easy. And I think that the folks doing this 60% rule measure are finding out that that's not the case from what I've heard through the rumor mill. But my passion related to this is the fact that when it comes down to the way that government works in North Dakota and in any state, you know, the people should have the final say on pretty much everything and should set the rules for the legislature. It's my view that because North Dakota is unique in the way that it created the initiated measure process early on in its infancy, that we have a system that is designed to promote citizen accountability by elected officials, and that we should maintain that as much as possible. And this idea that all of a sudden, because there have been a few measures on the ballot and a few of those have passed that we don't like, that we need to start changing the rules. And you know, the idea that any constitutional measure going forward should require 60% is going to take a lot of things off the table that a lot of us conservatives are very much in favor of changing, whether it be, you know, abolishing the income tax, abolishing property tax, doing all sorts of things that would rein in the legislature or rein in the governor. Mm-hmm. And you know, the initiated measure process is a stopgap. And you know, my opposition over the years has been that the legislature trying to give the people an opportunity to vote away their own power, or any special interest group trying to do that, is eventually going to hinder our ability to actually limit our own government. And while it may seem like a good idea on the surface, years down the road, if it's implemented, we'll definitely regret it.
Yeah. So here's my thing. So I'm mildly in favor of the measure. Well, let me say it somewhat differently. I'm in favor of making it somewhat more difficult to change the Constitution. And I know that in current law, and the way it's been for a long time, is that the signature gathering is that stopgap, sort of that threshold, because it's twice as many signatures to change the Constitution as it is to change the century code, our state law. And I think that that's reasonable, but what we're finding really is if you have $500,000, you'll get the signatures. That's all it takes. Mm-hmm. You'll have a firm, they'll go out, they will get the signatures. So what it comes down to is to put a measure on the ballot with $500,000, it'll get there. So for people with money, there is no sort of limiting threshold to try and get across. It's just $500,000. For people without money that are citizens and trying to get it, that's difficult. That's 35,000 signatures is a lot. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know that's not the exact number, but you want a little extra. So shouldn't there be some? Would you feel differently if it was 55% of the vote required instead of 60?
No, because I think 55% is too arbitrary. Like, it's just grabbing a number. And there was a bill last session regarding school bond elections that would have set different school districts based on their population at 53% or 55%. and it just didn't really make any sense. I would agree that, if you're going to do something, and I suggested this in the last session and in 2019 when the legislature was looking at the 60% rule and the House actually voted in favor of it, that, I would be in favor of increasing the signature threshold if we had a modernization process for that signature threshold in the form of online signatures. I would like to get more citizens involved in the process. I think that increasing the threshold to say 10% of the population and then creating a system where people can go onto the Secretary of State's website, read the measure in full, get information from both sides, and then, using their driver's license or whatever form of identification, sign to support it. Because that will allow people to be more informed when they're signing. It'll get more people involved, and it actually would take the money out of the process. It's my view that with all the ways that both the legislature and now the chamber's approach, all these approaches to make it more difficult actually increase the amount of money required to do it. Push the true grassroots people that don't have money out, and ultimately will empower the out-of-state interests that like to dump money into North Dakota. We are a very cheap place to play when it comes to politics.
That's one of my concerns.
The problem is that we don't have the money ourselves in North Dakota. It's the out-of-staters that have the money.
Right.
And I'm also not a big fan of Citizens United. Back in 2017, I helped put together a bill in the legislature that would have regulated the amount of money and where money could come from for initiated measures. Basically a one-for-one rule that says for every dollar out of state, you got to raise a dollar in state. So if you can raise $2 million in the state of North Dakota, you deserve to get $2 million from California. Because we both know that it's next to impossible to raise $2 million for a measure in North Dakota.
Yes.
So if you're that popular, you should win that lottery. Unfortunately, the very same special interest groups that are in favor of increasing the threshold and making it more difficult were the ones that were loudest against doing anything on the campaign finance side of it.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Well, it's an interesting measure. I think that there are good folks, well-intentioned on both sides of it. It's a matter, I guess, of how you feel about the ease in which the Constitution can be changed. I do like your idea about making it easier to vote online. I'm sorry, to get the signatures online, because at least that's an equating factor between the big money bags folks from out of state and citizens groups that can then access those same signatures without having to struggle with the money. All right, 1 minute. I want to give you, you've had some interesting comments about the Civil War in the North Dakota GOP.
Yeah, it's definitely been an interesting thing to watch. I've limited my exposure and involvement to it in recent years. To me, it's interesting that the folks, there's a lot of purging and counter-purging going on, it seems to me. You've got folks that would like to push out the establishment and based off of ideology, and then you've got the establishment that has brought it upon itself to beat them to the punch. The counter purge is really in full force right now, and we see this all the time. Last time I was on, we talked about the various waves that have come into the party. Every few years, there's a new group that thinks that the last groups were not conservative enough, or something. And right now we've got a fight going on, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. I think that a lot of it comes down to money. The party's finances are not as good as people think it is.
No.
And you got to have leadership that can raise money, or else things start to crumble.